What's up guys, hope you're having a good day. In this video we are going to be taking a deep dive into all of the main card fights taking place at UFC 266 from a gambling perspective. So if you're thinking of betting the fights this weekend, this is the only video you need to watch. Hopefully you'll be able to use the information in this video to make better betting decisions and hopefully earn some extra cash. And if you'd like to watch breakdown videos for all the prelim fights on this card, head on over to my website mmabettingtips.com, link in the description below, where you'll find a wide range of bets for every UFC event, as well as breakdown videos for every single fight and very detailed fight research videos as well. But now let's get into the first fight that I want to talk about in this video, which is going to be the fight that kicks off the main card. It is Cynthia Calvillo against Jessica Andrade. Now this is one of those matchups that when I first saw the UFC match these two girls up, straight away I felt that this was going to be an absolute cakewalk for Jessica Andrade, a total squash match and a fight that Andrade would win absolutely easily. Now after watching the recent fights of both these girls, I do still think this is a terrible stylistic matchup for Calvillo and Jessica Andrade is very likely to win, but there is a lot more risk here for Andrade than I initially thought. So let's start off by taking a look at the odds and then I can kind of explain the risk factors that Calvillo poses to Andrade here. So Andrade, one of the biggest favourites on the card, current average odds of about 1.38, which is minus 263 for an implied probability of 72%. And if we look at the odds on Cynthia Calvillo, we can see that she's currently around about an average of 3.15, which is plus 215 for an implied probability of 32%. So roughly, the bookies are looking at this as a fight, a 70-30 in favour of Andrade, which means if you want to bet Andrade, you've got to give her a better than 72% chance of winning. If you want to bet Calvillo, got to give her a better than 32% chance of winning. So when we break this fight down, that's what we've got in the back of our minds. Are the odds off here, or are the odds roughly where they should be? And when you look at how these two fighters match up from a stylistic point of view, there's no getting away from the fact that this is a tough fight for Calvillo, and that's why she's a big underdog. Andrade is one of these fighters that is very strong, very physically imposing, and even though when you look at the tail of the tape, she's going to be smaller than Calvillo, the difference in physicality between these two girls is absolutely enormous. I mean, Andrade is only 5'1" with a 62-inch reach, which does make her smaller than Calvillo, who's 5'4" with a 64-inch reach. But that means absolutely nothing here. Andrade, in terms of her wingspan, is smaller than pretty much everyone in the UFC's flyweight division, and the size difference won't mean anything here because Andrade is so strong, so powerful, and she's going to be able to overwhelm Calvillo with that physicality. Calvillo is, like I say, very slight, very feminine, and she doesn't really carry any power in her hands. She's quite flat-footed, and it's quite easy to, push Calvillo back and force her to fight in an uncomfortable range on the outside, which is obviously exactly what Andrade is going to want to do. Andrade is going to want to come forward, force Calvillo to fight on the outside, and then we know Andrade is going to come forward and wing big power punches with those big wide hooks. Now this is a particularly big problem for Calvillo because unlike some of Andrade's past opponents like Caitlin Chookagian, Rose Namajunas, or Valentina Shevchenko, unlike some of these past opponents, Calvillo doesn't have the footwork to circle away from Andrade and kind of play the role of Matador as Andrade is coming forward looking to load up on those big power hooks. And she also doesn't have the power in her hands, or the offensive wrestling to kind of deter Andrade from coming forward recklessly. There's nothing she can really do to alleviate the pressure that Andrade is going to put on her. So straight away it makes perfect sense that Andrade is a really big favourite because Calvillo is going to be outgunned here standing in a really big way, and unless she can get the fight to the ground, she's going to be in a lot of trouble here. I don't give Calvillo a chance if this fight stays standing. But when we talk about grappling, this fight does become a lot more interesting because Valentina Shevchenko exposed some pretty huge holes in Jessica Andrade's ground game in their last fight. Jessica Andrade, like we've mentioned, is one of these really strong, physically imposing fighters that I feel in the past has got away with quite a lot just by being stronger than her opponents. So, it's very difficult to take her down because of how strong she is. If you do get her down, it's very difficult to hold her down because she can just hulk out and, you know, explode back up to her feet. But obviously Shevchenko is a fighter that is also blessed with a lot of athleticism, strength and physicality. So much more than most girls in the flyweight division, which is why Shevchenko is such a dominant champion. And so when Andrade ran into Shevchenko, all the kind of things that she would usually do to get herself out of trouble in relying on her strength and physicality didn't work anymore because Shevchenko was just as strong and just as athletic. And what we saw was that Andrade didn't have the technical ability to kind of go with her strength and physicality. So she got exposed bad on the ground. Shevchenko took her down easily, held her down easily, and made Andrade look a very low level on the ground, which is interesting because Shevchenko in many ways kind of showed a very good blueprint in how to beat Andrade. Now, we know Calvillo's a very high level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. She's not a bad offensive wrestler either. Calvillo's issue is that she doesn't shoot many takedowns in her fights because she doesn't want to burn herself out. You know, when she does exert a lot of energy to try and get fights to the ground, she does become flatter. So she's more of an opportunistic grappler that will look to maybe shoot 2 or 3 takedowns per fight and then hope outside of that, you know, you make a mistake, slip on a banana skin and give her opportunities to like jump on your back or hit a trip takedown or jump on top of you on the ground. And on the ground, like I say, Calvillo's an absolute nightmare. The issue that Calvillo has got here is that massive gap in physicality, right? She's very feminine, she's very slight. Andrade is like the Incredible Hulk. She's big and she's strong. So it's not going to be easy to take her down. And even if you do take her down, it's not going to be easy to hold her down. But Andrade did repeatedly show us one weakness in her fight against Valentina Shevchenko, which I do think could get her into a lot of trouble against Cynthia Calvillo. And the weakness that she showed us is that when she does get taken down, or when she is defending takedowns where her opponent is kind of using a little bit of chain wrestling to work for takedowns and drag her to the ground, Andrade has got a really nasty habit of completely exposing her back. And she doesn't really defend her back in the correct way. She just relies on her ability to stand up so quickly after being taken down that her opponent's not going to be quick enough to get to her back before she's back on her feet. If you watch Calvillo's past fights, you'll know that when it comes to back takes, she is an absolute ninja. You give her like the slightest, tiniest opening, the split-second opening, and she's going to jump all over your back, take you back, and put you in a really bad position. So this fight has become a lot more interesting for me now, personally, from a betting point of view, because initially I was feeling like, you know, Jessica Andrade is a big favourite. It's going to be a cakewalk for her. It's an easy stylistic matchup. And while this is still a good stylistic matchup for her, I now see Calvillo as way more of a liver underdog than I initially anticipated. So this is a very difficult fight for betting because Andrade deserves to be the favourite here. She's not going to be easy to take down. She's not going to be easy to hold down. And if the fight stays standing, she absolutely smokes Cynthia Calvillo. There's no way to debate that. But there's no way I can even consider betting on Jessica Andrade as such a big favourite with her odds carrying an implied probability of about, 72%, was it? 73%? When she showed us such giant weaknesses on the ground against Valentina Shevchenko. And look, I know that Shevchenko is levels and levels and levels above Cynthia Calvillo, but Shevchenko's grappling from a technical point of view isn't good. It's not great. That's the wrong thing for me to say. Shevchenko's good on the ground, but she's not great on the ground. She's not like a real high-level technician. In many ways, Shevchenko's similar to Andrade in that, you know, a lot of the stuff Shevchenko does on the ground, or a lot of the success that Shevchenko has in the ground, does come from her strength or athleticism and physicality. But in terms of Shevchenko's, you know, technical ability on the ground, she's not on the level of someone like Calvillo when it comes to pure Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You don't see the slick transitions, the crafty reversals, the sneaky back takes You don't see that craftiness from Shevchenko on the ground that we see from someone like Calvillo. So Calvillo can punish Andrade, for mistakes she makes in ways that Shevchenko couldn't, and that's what makes this one interesting. So for me, it is a tricky fight to bet because I do expect Andrade to do very well here. It is a difficult stylistic matchup for Calvillo. Andrade is too big of a favourite for me to bet, but because it is a bad stylistic matchup for Calvillo, I'm not rushing out to bet her as a big underdog either. But I just wanted to talk about what I've seen in the footage in this video, because I know a lot of you watching this are probably, throwing Andrade into your parlays and, maybe even preparing to load up on Andrade and bet her pretty big. And I just wanted to kind of talk to you about what I've seen in the footage, because if I hadn't researched this fight, I would feel exactly the same as you if you're thinking this is an easy fight for Andrade. After watching footage of their recent fights, I feel a lot less confident in Andrade. So I hope you found that useful. Sorry that we don't really have any bets on this one, but I think the bookies have kind of nailed the odds, and the odds are pretty much where they should be. So let's move on and talk about the next fight, which is another big favourite. Curtis Blaydes, obviously one of the biggest favourites on the card, against Jairzinho Rozenstruik. So if you take a look at the odds on this one, roughly the same odds as the Calvillo and Andrade fight, where Curtis Blaydes currently around about an average of 1.33, which is minus 303 for an implied probability of 75%. And if we look at the odds on Rozenstruik, he's currently around about 3.50, which is plus 250 for an implied probability of 29%. So, Blaydes, one of the biggest favourites on the card. And if you were to ask me, who has the toughest stylistic opponent to deal with this weekend, other than Lauren Murphy, who would it be? I would say Jairzinho Rozenstruik. In terms of the biggest mountain that a fighter has to climb this weekend, Rozenstruik's got by far the biggest mountain to climb. This is a real tough stylistic matchup for him, because we know Rozenstruik's takedown defense is very, very poor, and we know on the ground he's not even white belt level. I mean, he doesn't even have a ground game. On the ground, this guy looks like he's never even attended a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu class. He just has nothing. And so, with Curtis Blaydes being such a great offensive wrestler, such a strong offensive wrestler, by far the best offensive wrestler in the heavyweight division. Romanov's nowhere near the level of Curtis Blaydes when it comes to offensive wrestling. This is the worst stylistic matchup imaginable for Rozenstruik. We talk about Cyril Gane as being an amazing heavyweight, and the main reason why he is such an amazing heavyweight is because he can move like someone in a much lower weight class than him. He's got a great gas tank. He doesn't fight like a heavyweight. He fights like a welterweight, right? That's why Gane is so great. But I do think that in many ways Curtis Blaydes has such a huge future in the sport that he just gets overlooked due to a few bad knockout losses. But I feel Curtis Blaydes in many ways is like Cyril Gane, because he's also got a very good gas tank for a heavyweight. He also moves and fights like a fighter in a much lower weight class. You very rarely see heavyweights that can chain wrestle as well as Blaydes, that can push a pace as hard as Blaydes without gassing out, or can shoot really deep double leg takedowns with the timing, the speed, the drive that Blaydes can generate on them. So at only 38 years old, I think Blaydes is potentially going to be one of the best heavyweights ever, because at such a young age, he's already got such a good base to work from. And we know if you're a strong wrestler, you've got the skills to dictate where the fight takes place. So I know that Blaydes' career has been derailed for some really bad knockout losses. I know that he gets rock, drop, wobble, knocked down a lot in his fights. He does get wobbled a lot. His chin seems to be a magnet, for his opponent's power punches. But he's so young for a heavyweight. We know heavyweights tend to peak later in their career, like 35, 36, 37 years old. Blaydes is an absolute baby for a heavyweight at 30 years old, and he's got such a good base to work from. So it's a great stylistic matchup for Blaydes. with his level of wrestling, with his ground game, you know, he probably only needs one takedown here and a couple minutes to work, and he'll be able to put Rozenstruik away. He'll either, you know, stop him with ground and pound very quickly, because he'll be able to put Rozenstruik in a position where Rozenstruik can't defend himself, or Rozenstruik will, you know, give up a submission and look for a way out. So it's a great stylistic matchup for Blaydes. Unfortunately, you know, his advantages are largely baked into his odds, right? He's a huge favourite. His odds carry an implied probability of 75%. Means you've got to give Blaydes a better than 75% chance of winning this, which is always tough in heavyweight fights because these are big boys. Every single heavyweight carries the power in their hands to KO any other heavyweight in the division dead on their night. And we know Rozenstruik's dangerous, right? We know Blaydes has a habit of getting rocked, dropped, wobbled, knocked out. If Rozenstruik connects, Blaydes is going to be in a lot of trouble. But I think it's going to be a lot harder for Rozenstruik to land the kill shot here than it will be for Blaydes to get this fight to the ground and completely dominate Rozenstruik. The one thing that I would say about Rozenstruik that I think, you know, has started to hurt him a little bit and go against him is that he doesn't really do very much. It's like the old saying in sports, right? If you don't shoot, you don't score. The more you shoot, the more of an opportunity you have to score. The problem with Rozenstruik is he's very accurate, he's very fast, he's very powerful, he's very dangerous standing, but he takes that sniper approach where he's looking to land you with that one big kill shot, but he doesn't throw much. And if you're not throwing much, the probability of you landing that kill shot obviously reduces significantly. So I think that's one of the reasons why I do think Blaydes is going to do work here. I think Rozenstruik's probably going to be so worried about being taken down, it's going to make him even more gun shy. And that's going to make it even less likely that Rozenstruik can land that kill shot before Blaydes takes him down, puts him away on the ground. So, great stylistic matchup for Blaydes. Very risky to bet him as a huge favourite, but I do think he gets it done easily. I'm just not really a fan of betting heavyweights in this odds range because it only takes one shot to end your night, and at heavyweight, we see flash knockouts a lot more frequently than we do in other divisions, right? So there's no way I would be betting Rozenstruik here. I think he gets dominated, but at the same time, there's not that much upside in betting Blaydes either, which is a big shame. So let's move on to the next one. Nick Diaz, Robbie Lawler, and really it's the fight that everyone's talking about this week. This fight has got by far the most attention out of any other fight on this card, out of any other fight I can remember in a while actually, and I'm looking forward to seeing what happens with this one. So let's start off by taking a look at the odds. So both these guys currently in the even money odds range, but Robbie Lawler's odds have declined a lot in the last 24 hours on the back of this fight moving from the welterweight division to the middleweight division, and also on the back of an interview Nick Diaz did with Brett Okamoto where he said tons of crazy stuff. There was obviously an interview that broke earlier in the week featuring Josh Thompson where he hinted that there could be some issues with Diaz coming into this fight to the point where he might not even be healthy enough to turn up on Saturday. That didn't really affect the odds, but the Brett Okamoto interview really does seem to have affected the odds because straight from the horse's mouth we're getting Nick Diaz basically say, I've had a real rough camp, I'm not really motivated to fight anymore, and I don't want to be here, which is obviously red flag city. So Robbie Lawler currently, his average odds are around 1.77, which is minus 130 for an implied probability of 57%. And if we take a look at the odds on Diaz, he's currently around about an average of 2.15, which is plus 115 for an implied probability of 47%. So close to 50-50 in the eyes of the bookies, with that slightly leaning towards Robbie. And it's a very interesting fight, this. We'll start off by discussing the X factors. So the X factors really, we talk a lot about technique in these breakdowns, but I think the X factors for a matchup like this are, the most important thing to kind of focus on. So straight up off the bat, both guys are old as hell, right? Nick Diaz, 38 years old. Robbie Lawler, 39 years old. But I do think there is a big difference in the ages here. Both guys are very old. There's not many guys, competing at the top of the welterweight division or competing at the top of the lightweight, middleweight division, in their late 30s for a reason. This is a young man's sport. Father Time's undefeated. Father Time comes for everyone. And there's no doubt that Robbie Lawler and Nick Diaz are going to be declining significantly from fight to fight now. But one thing that is very interesting about this matchup is that Robbie Lawler, at the very least, has been active. He's definitely declining, but we can see that he's been pretty active over the last few years, right? He fought as recently as a year ago. When you look at Nick Diaz, he obviously hasn't fought in 6 years. So that's a huge X factor to take into consideration because, even though I think Nick Diaz, I'm not sure if he's a vegan anymore, he may be pescatarian now. But even though we know Nick Diaz has got a great diet, he's got his own gym, Nick Diaz Academy, so he's probably in the gym all the time training his fighters. We know he runs triathlons. I know that Nick Diaz is a guy that stays healthy, but he isn't going to have the compounded gains of going from fight camp to fight camp to fight camp, where, for an 8 to 10 week period leading up to each one of those fights, he's, on a strict diet to manage his weight. He's, focused on, a particular opponent and formulating a game plan and strategy to beat that opponent. He's improving his skills and staying sharp. There's a big difference between, running a gym, doing triathlons, training guys up, to being in fight camp where your sole focus is to go into an octagon or in a cage in your underwear and kill another man. That's what these guys are training to do. They're training to kill someone until the time limit's up or the referee steps in and stops them. Nick hasn't had that. Who knows what he's been doing in the last 6 years. There's a lot of talk about him partying and going off the rails. I know he's got a lot of business interests. He said in the Brett Okamoto interview, we'll play a clip from that in a moment. He said that really the reason why he's fighting this weekend is because he was working on a business with one of his partners, and his business partner basically let him down, and now he's fighting because he needs the money. The point I'm trying to make is, Diaz hasn't been focusing on fighting for the last 6 years. He might have a little bit, but it's probably been one of Robbie's main focus over the last 6 years, right? So Robbie's got that compounded growth, going from camp to camp to camp to camp, keeping that athletic performance up. Even while he's declining, he's kind of pushing Father Time a little bit, pushing him away a little bit as he's, going from fight to fight, camp to camp, whereas Nick Diaz has not got that. The best example I could probably think of was Conor McGregor. When Conor was on his rise, on his featherweight title run, then leading into his fight at lightweight to win the title against Eddie Alvarez, he was a young, hungry, motivated beast going from camp to camp to camp, eating the best foods, training hard, sole focus on fighting. As soon as Proper 12 came along, as soon as he started doing these fun fights against Diaz, as soon as he started living that celebrity lifestyle, those compounded gains going from camp to camp to camp to camp, missing out on those started to affect him. Conor has never been the same since. So who knows what version of Diaz we're going to get this week. Very unlikely it is a good version though. Ring rust is a real deal, and missing out on all those compounded gains is also a very big deal. In terms of their size, Diaz 6 foot tall with a 76-inch reach. Robbie Lawler 5'11" with a 74-inch reach. Both guys roughly about the same size, although it is notable that this fight is obviously now taking place at middleweight instead of welterweight at the request of Nick Diaz. This is quite significant, and Diaz has kind of played this a little bit dirty because in Robbie Lawler's interview with Brett Okamoto this week on ESPN, he was a little bit pissed off because he's obviously been, cutting weight over the last couple of weeks. He's been dieting very, very strictly throughout camp, which could deplete his energy levels. It could have an impact on his recovery. And he was kind of annoyed because, he said, I've got no problem doing the fight at middleweight, but if you would have told me earlier, if you would have told me last week or 2 weeks or a month ago, I wouldn't have had to kill myself in training so much to diet strictly and already begin the weight cutting process. So it kind of gives Diaz an unfair advantage where, Robbie has depleted himself to make 170 pounds over the last 10 weeks that he's been in training camp, whereas Nick quite clearly has had no intention of making 170 pounds, and now at the final hour he's changing the weight class, which means he hasn't dieted strictly. You know, he hasn't suffered in camp like Robbie has to try and make 170 pounds, and yeah, that's not fair really. So Robbie's definitely going to be the victim there. It's playing a little bit dirty on Nick's part. But the biggest X factor of all is obviously what Josh Thompson said in an interview with Helen Yee earlier on this week, which is when, you know, things really started to unravel for Nick, right? So just listen to what Josh Thompson's got to say in this interview.
Especially in the UFC, Nick Diaz, he'll be making his return against Robbie Lawler, a rematch that's slated 17 years later. How do you see that playing out?
Well, there's a lot to be said right now. I don't know if you guys have been buzzed on the internet, but there's some stuff going around. I don't know if he's going to make the fight, if he will make the fight, if what happened. But look, I hope he makes the fight. If he does make the fight, this should be a great fight.
Is this breaking news?
I don't know. You guys should let us know. But there's a video going around on social media right now that he may not be able to make the fight of footage. So if you guys check that out, let us know what you guys think. Look, I hope he's okay. I hope he's able to make the fight. But if it does happen, this has been one of the most exciting fights that I've been anticipating for the longest time. Every time I had heard that he was going to come back out, that he was going to come out of retirement, he was going to fight, or he was going to get back in the cage, the only fight that I really cared to watch him fight was going to be either George Masvidal or Robbie Lawler, because I would love to see those guys mix it up.
Well, looking at the main event, it is Brian Ortega versus...
So this, you could kind of see in Josh Thompson's face here. You look at the expression on his face, kind of realizes, I think, here that he fucked up. I think this was a classic case of a fighter having a microphone stuck in their face, not being prepared properly, giving an interview when their mind is preoccupied on other things, and just oversharing, saying the wrong thing at the wrong time in the heat of the moment under pressure. You've got to put yourself in Josh Thompson's position when that interview took place. I think the interview was done last Friday, the night before Bellator 266. Thompson was working the desk on that Phil Davis versus Joel Romero fight. All Thompson's thinking about is Bellator, doing his job, crushing it, and you know, he doesn't expect to have a question thrown at him in an interview about Nick Diaz and Robbie Lawler. And what it looked to me like happened in that interview was that Josh Thompson had been shown a video by someone, you know, within the MMA fraternity, a fighter, a coach, something like that. And whatever happened, Nick Diaz didn't look good. I don't know if it was him out maybe partying, you know, very close to the time of the fight, if it was him looking, you know, big and out of shape to the extent where he wouldn't have been able to make weight. Maybe he got rocked bad, knocked out or hurt in training. Wherever it was, someone showed Josh Thompson this video, and I think Josh felt that this was out there on the internet, on social media for everyone to see. I don't think Josh realized that it was actually a video that hadn't circled around on social media yet, and so he blurted out what he had seen, or alluded to what he'd seen, and then he couldn't put, you know, the genie back in the bottle. It was already out, and he kind of tried to backtrack by saying, I'm really looking forward to this fight, etc., etc. So I feel bad for Josh, but Josh is not the kind of guy that is going to lie, make up stuff. You know, he's not a hype man. He's an honest dude. You know, he's a professional, and, you know, there's no smoke without fire. So that's a huge red flag relating to Nick Diaz. Whatever Josh Thompson saw in that video wasn't good. You know, it was bad enough to make Josh question if Diaz is even in a healthy enough place where he's capable of fighting this weekend, which is not good. You know what I mean? It's really not good. And then yesterday, we started to see some major line movement, some major odds movement, you know, on the Robbie Lawler versus Diaz fight on the back of this Diaz interview. You know, being released where he talks to Brett Okamoto. Now, this is a 20-minute long interview, and Diaz says a lot of crazy shit in this interview, which is nothing new. You know, Nick Diaz, Nate Diaz, they've said crazy shit in interviews throughout their entire career. I'll just play you a very short clip from this, and I highly recommend, if you're thinking of betting this fight this weekend, go watch the full interview, because honestly, I wish I could play you the whole thing on this video, because pretty much every second of this interview is relevant to this fight. There's so much to pick apart and break down here that Nick says, but I'll just play you a very short clip.
Feel like you're under stress this week? Since I've had this fight coming up, I've been under a lot of stress. Yeah, it has not been an easygoing training camp because I haven't fought for a long time. For one, and then for two, things just didn't go my way.
So Diaz said two things there, right? He said that the training camp has been very, very difficult because things didn't go his way. So we've had Josh Thompson kind of say that he's seen a video where there's something going on with Diaz where he may not be healthy enough to fight. And now straight from the horse's mouth, we've got Nick basically saying things didn't go my way through training camp. It wasn't good. So that's a huge red flag for me. On one hand, you have to kind of take it with a grain of salt because it is Nick Diaz. And like I say, he does say a lot of crazy shit in interviews. But there's no smoke without fire. And what Josh Thompson said, making me feel like there's some big issue with Nick Diaz right now that we don't know about. And it sounds like it's going to have a pretty huge impact on the way he performs this weekend against Robbie Lawler. But Robbie has got his own issues. Certainly has his own issues. And what I would say about this fight, the reason why I find this so interesting is because we can kind of speculate how Diaz is going to look on Saturday night. We can make assumptions about what issues Diaz has coming into this matchup and what Josh Thompson may have been alluding to. But ultimately, if we're just going to deal in facts, we don't know how Diaz is going to look this weekend. We can assume that he's not going to look great, but we don't know. If we're just dealing in facts, we absolutely 100% know. We have 1,000% confirmation that Robbie Lawler is on a very, very steep decline now. There's no way to dress it up. His last two performances have been shockingly bad to the point where, to me, it looked like he almost threw the fight against Neil Magny. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. If you understand grappling and you understand what Robbie Lawler is capable of, I mean, Robbie borderline threw the fight against Neil Magny. If you guys want to see or kind of want to appreciate what I'm talking about, go and listen to what Henry Hooft says to Robbie Lawler in between rounds in that fight. Henry Hooft is basically straight up asking Robbie, like, Robbie, what the fuck are you doing? You're fighting like a moron. Unfortunately, this is the biggest red flag imaginable in combat sports. There are certain red flags that appear in the tail end of a fighter's career where when they demonstrate certain behaviors, you absolutely know that's a sign that they're totally shot, they're totally done, and their career's over. And unfortunately, Robbie showed us some of that in the Colby Covington fight, and then absolutely 100% conclusively in the Neil Magny fight. And the red flag that I'm talking about is he tried to lose. He made conscious decisions in that fight to put himself in a position where he couldn't win. There were so many times in his fight against Neil Magny where there was a right thing to do and a wrong thing to do, and Robbie consciously made the decision to do the wrong thing. It's a very strange thing that you see happen to some fighters when they're on a decline, where self-destructive behavior starts to creep into their performance, where they no longer appear to want to win. Instead, they actively try to lose. And the Neil Magny fight was very difficult to watch because within that 15-minute period, there were times where Robbie Lawler did the correct thing to work out of a bad position, but then consciously put himself back in the same bad position and then didn't do the correct thing to work his way back out of it. He, for whatever reason, just didn't want to win that fight. And it had nothing to do with what Neil Magny did. It had nothing to do with it at all. It doesn't matter whether Robbie Lawler was fighting Hannah Cyphers, my fucking sister, or Thanos. It doesn't matter who was in there with Robbie on the 29th of August. He would have lost because he wasn't trying to win. And that's the biggest red flag at all. The biggest red flag of all for me in this matchup. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter how these two guys match up from a technical perspective. It doesn't matter what both guys are capable of and how they match up stylistically. Ultimately, fighting is 90% mental. And if you're not motivated to win, if you're not trying to win, it doesn't matter who your opposition is, you won't win. It doesn't matter how good Man United are. If Ronaldo goes out and scores 20 own goals, Man United are going to lose. It doesn't matter if they're playing a team of... It doesn't matter who they're playing. It could be playing anyone. If you look at the NFL, if every single time Tom Brady throws the ball, he throws it the other team and we see turnovers every time he throws the ball, the Bucks are going to lose. Doesn't matter how good a fighter is, what their technical capabilities are, what their skill set is, how they match up stylistically against their opponents. If they're not trying to win, they don't have that will to win. They have that mental block now where they're demonstrating self-destructive behaviors. They're not going to win. It was like watching someone in the WWE. Lawler's performance was just... it was one level up from throwing the fight. I was appalled. It was shocking. Go listen to how Henry Hoof talks to Robbie in between rounds. Let me know what you think in the comments below, but it was hard to watch. I love Robbie. I'm a big fan of Robbie. Big, just a big fan and admirer of his heart and all the things that he's achieved throughout his career. And to see him perform like that, it was tough to watch. And we have seen another red flag in Robbie's career in his last 2 fights. This was more prominent in the fight against Colby Covington, but it was another red flag that you see from a fighter when they're on a steep decline, and that is that he just can't pull the trigger anymore. He moves like Robbie Lawler, he looks like Robbie Lawler, he looks in great shape, he's still got a great gas tank, he can still take a shot, he's still tough as nails, he's very good at cutting the cage off, he's got good head movement, good footwork, but for every reason, when he gets into the positions to throw now, there's like a mental block. He can't pull the trigger like he used to. And unfortunately, this is another big red flag we see in fighters on a steep decline. So it's a very tough matchup, this, because there's huge red flags with both guys. But if we're just dealing in facts, we absolutely 100% know Robbie Lawler is on a very steep decline. We can assume that Diaz is totally shot as well because of all his shenanigans outside the cage. The weight cut issue, the rumours Josh Thompson's talked about, the stuff Diaz said, in his interview with Brett Okamoto. We can make assumptions about Diaz, but he hasn't shown us that he's totally shot because he hasn't been fighting. So from a betting point of view, I personally think you gotta be crazy to bet this fight. You may as well go play roulette or craps because it's a total gamble. We have no way to know. Absolutely no way to know how either of these guys is going to look on Saturday night. Because on one hand, you can say Diaz has been distracted by his weed company. He's been out partying. He hasn't been able to make weight. There's rumours that he's not in a fit state to fight from Josh Thompson. Straight from the horse's mouth in that Brett Okamoto interview, Nick said he doesn't want to fight, but he's got to fight because his business partner let him down and he needs the money. So on one hand, you could say Diaz is going to look like shit based on all those things, and I would completely agree with you. But then on the other hand, if you bet Robbie, if he's not trying to win, I'd bet my sister to beat him in a fight. It goes back to the Ronaldo example. If Ronaldo's going to score 20 own goals, Man United aren't going to win. It doesn't matter that Ronaldo's one of the greatest players of all time. If you're not trying to win, you won't win. And Robbie didn't try to win against Neil Magny. So for me, this fight comes down to what version of Robbie Lawler shows up. Because we know he's in great shape. We know he can still take a shot. We saw that in the Colby Covington fight. We know he's still got 3 rounds of cardio. We saw that in the Magny fight. I know this is a 5-round fight, but point being, we know Robbie's cardio is still good. We know he's still reasonably good everywhere. The question is he coming to win? If he's not, he's going to lose. I don't care who his opponent is. If Robbie shows up and performs like he did against Neil Magny, he'll lose to Nick Diaz. But was the Neil Magny fight just a bad night at the office? What was off with Robbie that night? Who the fuck knows? I don't. Leave a comment below and let me know what you think. It was a shocking performance. I'd be really interested to know what your theories are on what the fuck happened to Robbie there. So this is not a fight I would be betting. Sorry to be boring, but this fight is total chaos. I would definitely pass on this one. Keep it tight. There's much stronger positions for you to put your cash than this. So let's move on to the next fight, which is the co-main event. It's for all the bacon, all the cheese, all the chips. The flyweight title fight between Lauren Murphy and Valentina Shevchenko. So obviously, Shevchenko is a massive favourite here. Current average odds are about 1.07, which is minus 1,429. Fuck me, I don't say that very often. For an implied probability of 93%. And if we take a look at the odds on Lauren Murphy, she is currently around about an average of 9.50, which is plus 850 for an implied probability of 11%. So, you'd have to go and find... I mean, you'd probably have to go to an asylum to find someone picking Lauren Murphy to win this fight. I mean, you'd have to be fucking crazy. Obviously, Valentina Shevchenko is a huge favourite for a reason. She's a nightmare. In my opinion, she's the greatest female fighter of all time. I know Amanda Nunes beat her, but it was in a weight class above Shevchenko's current weight class, and it was a very, very close fight. I think Shevchenko's the greatest female fighter of all time. I think she's brilliant, and she deserves to be the favourite here. The problem is, she's also a giant favourite. I don't want to waste your time with this one. An implied probability of 93% means you have to give Valentina a better than 93% chance of winning, which in a cage fight to the death is basically impossible to do, because Valentina could get disqualified, she could throw a kick and break her ankle, she could blow her knee out, she could throw a punch and end up with a broken hand, compound fracture, the referee weighs it off, maybe Murphy catches her with a grazing jab, cuts her bad, doctor stoppage. Maybe Shevchenko has a bad weight cut, maybe she suffers from crippling performance anxiety on the night. There's lots of ways Shevchenko can lose, no matter how unlikely they may be. Problem is, when her odds carry an implied probability of 93%, there's no margin for error. So you can't bet someone at these odds in an MMA fight, or rarely. It's virtually impossible. So in fights like this, even if you think the big favourite is going to win, the question always becomes, is there value on the underdog? Because remember, just because you think that a fighter is going to lose doesn't necessarily mean that their odds don't present us with a decent risk to reward ratio. Because obviously if you put Lauren Murphy's odds into the implied probability calculator, 9.5, right? Plus 850 for an implied probability of 11%. Even if you think Murphy's going to get smoked here, the question you should be asking yourself is, does Murphy have a better than 11% chance of winning? It's tough to say, right? It's a big mountain for her to climb. It's a tough spot. Her and Rozenstruik probably going to have a real tough night. You look at this fight from a stylistic point of view. Murphy's quite flat-footed, doesn't move her head much. She's pretty bad defensively, tends to take a ton of damage in a lot of her fights. Her face often ends up looking like Darren Elkins after her matchups. Let's be real, Shevchenko's going to light her up standing. The one part of the victory that Murphy does have here is through her grappling. I said earlier on when we were breaking down that Andrade versus Calvillo fight, I don't think Shevchenko's grappling is great. We've kind of seen that in her fight against Jennifer Maia, where Maia was able to take her down and, kind of hold her down for 5 minutes. Shevchenko didn't really make much of an effort to work her way back up to her feet. We know that throughout Shevchenko's career, her ground game's been her weakness. We mentioned it a few moments ago. She lost to Amanda Nunes because she gave up a late takedown in round 5. Now, Murphy's not the best offensive wrestler. She doesn't have the heaviest top game. What does concern me a little bit about Shevchenko is if you do put her on her back, she doesn't make much of an effort to work back up to her feet. Now, Murphy doesn't usually shoot that many takedowns per round. What you'll usually see Murphy do is try and shoot a takedown in the final 30 seconds to a minute of every round to try and steal that round. But I expected to get lit up so bad standing in this fight that you could see a lot more grappling from her than usual. And who knows, man? If Shevchenko is going to give up weak takedowns and spend a lot of time on her back, this one could get a little bit too close for comfort with how easily Jennifer Maia was able to take Shevchenko down and hold her down. You got to remember, Jennifer Maia, she's from that Shuto box lineage. She's got a base in Muay Thai. You know, she's not a strong grappler. If she can hold Shevchenko down, someone like Laura Murphy can almost definitely hold Shevchenko down. But it's not going to be easy for Murphy because Shevchenko's fast. She's got great footwork. She's very physically imposing. She's very athletic. If she doesn't want to be taken down, it's not going to be easy for Murphy to get this fight to the ground. And I'm just talking about tiny risk factors here. We all know Shevchenko's likely to smoke Murphy. I'm just playing devil's advocate a little bit and, you know, giving you some risk factors with Shevchenko that you may want to think about. Another big risk factor with Shevchenko is that I do feel that she's starting to experience a phenomenon that a lot of dominant champions end up feeling or experiencing. It happens to pretty much all of them. It happened to Matt Hughes, happened to GSP, happened to Anderson Silva, happened to John Jones. I believe it's currently happening to Israel Adesanya. It happened to Max Holloway. And the phenomenon that I'm talking about is when a champion becomes dominant and is a champion for a long time, you quite often start to see them fight very safe and overly tactical, and they start to perform in a way that they're trying not to lose instead of trying to win. So they build their careers from a specific style which is devastating. It's the style that got them to the dance. But then they start to become overly tactical and instead fight not to lose, which results in fights and rounds ending up being closer than they need to be. You look at the GSP Johnny Hendricks fight. You look at Max Holloway's performances against Volkanovski twice, you know, and compare that to what he did against Keita. You look at Israel Adesanya's recent performances against Blachowicz and Romero, right? Way more gun shy than he used to be. You look at, you know, how John Jones has looked since the OSP fight, how much he struggled against Dominic Reyes and Thiago Santos. This phenomenon starts to creep in where I think there are so many benefits to being a champion, where you get pay-per-view revenue, special sponsorship and endorsement deals, that you really don't want to lose that title and all the benefits that come from it. And so that starts to creep into your performances. And I do think we have started to see a little bit of that creep in with Shevchenko. But we've seen different sides of her. We've seen the ruthless, razor-sharp, aggressive version of Shevchenko, you know, against Chukagin and Andrade. But then we've also seen the passive, more tactical Shevchenko that does kind of fight a little bit passively and does maybe make rounds a lot more closer than they need to be. And we saw that version of her against Liz Carmouche and Jennifer Maia. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is, if the Shevchenko that fought Chukagin or Andrade shows up, she's probably going to blow through Murphy and absolutely smoke her. But if the version of Shevchenko shows up to fought Carmouche and Maia, I wouldn't be surprised if Murphy has a little bit of success here. Probably doesn't win, but a little bit of success. Maybe makes some of these rounds a little bit too close for comfort. But we'll see what happens, because Shevchenko at her best is an absolute nightmare and virtually unbeatable. You know, at flyweight, she's an absolute beast. So obviously it doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out I'm not going to be betting this fight. So now let's move on to the main event, Alexander Volkanovski against Brian Ortega. So let's take a look at the odds on this one. Alexander Volkanovski currently average odds are about 1.57, which is minus 175 for an implied probability of 64%. And if we take a look at the odds on Brian Ortega, he is currently around about an average of 2.50, which is plus 150 for an implied probability of 40%. So this fight's roughly 60-40 in the eyes of the bookies. So what's very interesting about this matchup is when you go and research these two guys, it is virtually, in my opinion, it is virtually impossible to predict who's going to win this. I can't call this one. I could see both guys winning. It's impossible to predict who's going to win this fight. But what is very interesting about this matchup is I actually think it's a very predictable fight, which is a complete contradiction of what I've just said. But the point I'm trying to make is I can't work out who's going to win this, but I can work out two very likely scenarios. I only see this fight going one of two ways, and in that sense it's predictable. I just can't call which way it's going to go before both these guys meet in the octagon on Saturday night, and I don't think anyone can call which way this is going to go, you know, until we see it play out, because I do feel like both guys are very well equipped to exploit the other's weakness. The first scenario that I could see playing out is Volkanovski staying light on his feet and just chipping away at Ortega, outworking him, out-voluming him, hammering his legs with those leg kicks, staying behind the jab, and just out-hustling Ortega over 5 rounds. I don't give Ortega much of a chance of winning a decision here. Volkanovski moves so well. His footwork is so great. His movement is so great. He's just difficult to outwork. He stays behind the jab, stays behind the leg kicks. He's a very intelligent, strategic fighter that always comes in with a great game plan specifically tailored to exploiting his opponent's weaknesses. And Ortega's got so many weaknesses that can be exploited. I think the most likely outcome on this matchup, and the reason why Volkanovski is a favourite here, is Volk probably just dances around Ortega, chips away at him, and outvolumes him to win a decision. When it comes to striking, I do think Ortega's a little bit flat-footed and slow at times. I don't think he's great defensively. He does stand heavy on the lead leg, which makes him very, very susceptible to those hard outside leg kicks that Volkanovski used to slow down Holloway in that first fight. And I really just don't see Ortega being able to match the work rate of Volkanovski standing. So that's the first way I could see the fight playing out. Volk chipping away at Ortega, winning a decision. The second way that I could see this fight playing out favors Ortega. And this, if you held a gun to my head and you said who's the better bet here, who carries the better risk to reward ratio, I think Ortega's the better bet at underdog odds, because I think he's got a great chance of this second scenario playing out. And the scenario I am talking about is Volkanovski making one mistake in a fight and Ortega jumping all over it and punishing him for it. Volkanovski has got this Volkanovski's got this reputation of being this strong wrestler, this strong grappler, because he's from a rugby background. But I haven't seen it, and from what we have seen of Volkanovski's grappling, I am not impressed at all. If you look at Volkanovski's record right back to when he came into the UFC, so Kazuya is a striker, Hirota is a striker, Shane Young is a striker, Jeremy Kennedy is a grappler, but he failed to match the physicality of Volkanovski. Same issue with Elkins. Elkins isn't a strong offensive wrestler. We'll come back to the Chad Mendes fight in a second. But Aldo a striker, and obviously Holloway a striker. Point being, we haven't really seen Volkanovski face any decent grapplers in the UFC, apart from Chad Mendes. Now, if you're thinking of betting Volkanovski this week, I would highly, 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 highly recommend you to go and watch the second round of Volkanovski's fight against Chad Mendes. I know it was a very long time ago, and I know that with it being 3 years ago, Volkanovski's probably improved a lot since that fight. However, Chad Mendes took this guy down easily, and when he took Volkanovski down, Volkanovski looked very vulnerable on the ground. He gave his back up easily, and when Mendes took back control, Volkanovski just didn't look like he knew what to do. Now, this is a huge red flag for me, because if you give Brian Ortega a split-second opening, he's going to punish you for it on the ground. And my big issue with Volkanovski is that he obviously trains at City Kickboxing, which is a gym that, to be honest with you, has produced MMA fighters with pretty lousy ground games. If we look at the guys that have come out of City Kickboxing, Brad Riddell, very low level on the ground. Kai Kara France, very low level on the ground. Remember what Brandon Royval did to him. Dan Hooker, not great on the ground. Probably the better out of all of them, but not great on the ground. Look at how easily Jan Blachowicz took Izzy down and held him down. Izzy had nothing off his back. And, Blachowicz isn't a great grappler. He's a Polish kickboxer. Red flag City what Blachowicz was able to do with Izzy. So I know we've got to judge each individual fighter on their own merit, but all the guys at City Kickboxing are quite lousy on the ground. What makes us think Volkanovski is going to be any different? And even though he's got that compact, athletic, muscular frame, which will make it harder for him to be taken down than someone longer and taller than maybe a Hooker or an Adesanya, All we can do is make the best decision possible with the information we've got available. And it was red flag city if you go back and watch that second round of the Chad Mendes fight. Volkanovski looked a fish out of water on the ground. Now Ortega obviously has no offensive wrestling. So it's not going to be easy for him to get the fight to the ground, right? You very rarely see Ortega try to take his opponents down. However, this is the biggest fight in Ortega's career. This is for all the marbles. The biggest fight of Ortega's career for UFC gold. If ever there was a time where Ortega would come into a fight with a grappling heavy game plan, a wrestling heavy game plan, if ever there was a time for Ortega to work on his wrestling in a training camp leading up to a fight, this would be it. Because it's going to be very hard for him to win a stand-up fight. And if Ortega's smart, he will have been working very hard in his on his wrestling. And when you watch that second round of Volkanovski-Mendes, Volkanovski's takedown defense is awful. It really wouldn't take much wrestling to get this guy to the ground. But even if Ortega doesn't come in and look to wrestle, even if he doesn't come in with a grappling heavy game plan, Volkanovski has got to fight the perfect fight. He's got to avoid making a mistake for 25 minutes. Because it ain't going to be easy to get Ortega out of there. We know Volkanovski is more of a volume striker, doesn't really have that one-shot KO power. And we know Ortega can take a shot. He's tough as nails. He's got a granite chin. We've seen him take tons of damage against Max Holloway and hang in there. He's gone the distance with Korean Zombie. This ain't going to be an easy dude for Volkanovski to finish. So Volk has got to not make a mistake for 25 minutes. Problem with Volk is he's only 5'6". And I know Ortega's not that much taller than him. But Volkanovski does fight in that low compact, that low compact stance, right? He's just low, he's compact. Ortega's upright, rigid and tall. What that means is we know one of Ortega's biggest threats is his guillotine choke. He likes to jump on the head. Volkanovski's going to be in that naturally lower position. His head's going to be in that naturally lower position where Ortega can jump on that head and attack with guillotines. We know Ortega only needs a split-second opening to put you in a horrendous position. And from what I've seen in that Mendes fight, I think if Ortega does jump on Volkanovski's back or attack him with a guillotine, you know, or jump on a submission that Volkanovski doesn't see coming, based on how bad all the city kickboxing guys look on the ground, based on the fact that Volkanovski looked very vulnerable with when Mendes took his back, I wouldn't have any confidence in this guy to be able to deal, you know, with Ortega working for submission, putting him in a bad position. So to sum this one up, I wouldn't bet Volkanovski here as a big favourite. I just don't think you're getting a very good risk to reward ratio. If you absolutely must bet this fight, I do think Ortega at underdog odds gives you the better risk to reward ratio. This is the biggest fight of Ortega's career. At some point, I feel he's going to commit very hard to putting Volkanovski in a bad position on the ground or from in the clinch. He's going to attack with a nasty submission at various points in this fight, and I'm not convinced that Volkanovski has the skills to deal with that, because there are levels and levels and levels and levels between these two on the ground based on what I've seen. I don't care what grappling tournaments Volkanovski's competed in. I don't care what BJJ guys he's trained with. MMA grappling's different, and in terms of MMA grappling, from what I've seen, there's light years between these two. But let me know what you think in the comments below. That's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please hit the like button below, and please subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. Hit the bell notification to get notifications when these new videos get posted. And thank you very much for watching. Check out MMABettingTips.com. Have a great weekend. Make loads of money, and I'll see you very soon. Take care, guys.